This conference will now be recorded.
I would like to call this meeting to order for the Port Arthur Planning Commission on Tuesday, February 7th, 2023. We do not have cameras, so if the commissioners or anybody who speaks during public comment, if you could please state your name prior to talking. We are going to do a roll call, so we have the minutes who is specifically here. So Commissioner Rossi.
Here.
Commissioner Head. Here. Commissioner Lovendale. Here. Commissioner Burnt. Here. Commissioner Malone. Here. Commissioner Thielen.
Here.
Commissioner Herat is here. Do we have any additions to the agenda? Okay, if not, caller one, is that Shayla Kudlak? Caller one, somebody who's on the telephone. We discussed the minutes are unavailable for January 2023, just due to some transcribing issues. So should we get them next month?
I am hoping so. I will know more shortly.
Okay, so on to agenda item number 4, announcements and communications. We are having a workshop at 4:30 today with the City Council. So if possible, I would like to get through our meeting by 4:25, so we can at least have a 5-minute break to get resettled. So that's kind of my goal for this meeting, to go through. In here, you can see that we have the short-term rental ordinances and definitions. Ultimately, we'd like to just review them before we go into the City Council workshop with them. So I'm not thinking that this will be a huge thing that we can maybe discuss, because I really do think that workshop's going to be a huge piece for us. So
I have a quick question.
Commissioner Hedges.
Yeah, I just also want to thank Jessica for sending the webinar link. That was really informative. The ADU piece, I think, came about before I was on the Planning Commission. How did it get decided that ADUs wouldn't be available for short-term rentals? I'm just thinking because the webinar mentioned that was.
We had talked about it a long, yeah, you can.
Good. Make sure you say your name, will you?
Oh, sorry, Jessica Ginsburg. But we had talked about it months ago. Greg, I know that you can go.
Yes, we voted. The commission voted that they should not be used as short-term rentals.
Okay.
And I think, and right now ADUs aren't even in our code.
Okay.
And that's something that we were working with Ms. Shoji on before.
Okay, because that's one of the pieces with the primary residence for regulating short-term rentals. So I've also got a neighbor who has an ADU that was wondering why, and so I just thought I would ask what the reason was.
And if this is Commissioner Nera, I do believe that we said ADUs were the purpose of the long-term rentals. We wanted to make sure it stayed as a long-term rental option and not as a short-term, if I do remember that conversation correctly.
Commissioner Lovendale, that is correct.
Okay.
And it was to keep long-term rentals available.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
Okay. Jessica, do you have anything?
I know. Okay. We have a contract, hopefully, that's going to go to City Council for the planner on this City Council meeting. I just got it like an hour ago, less than an hour ago.
Perfect.
So I haven't even looked at it, so.
Okay, so we're going to go down to comments for the public on this agenda item only. We will only do 3 minutes. If you want to speak, please state your name and your address, and I will give you the 30 seconds warning and then the 3 minutes. So do we have any comments from the public? Agenda items only.
No,
Currently, they're not. So yes, we're only speaking right now on the short-term vacation rentals.
My name is Alan Johnson. I sent you a big list email a couple days ago. I wasn't going to talk about that today. Today, I'd like to talk about the 40 people, the 40 people on the list. The 40, there's exactly 40 people listed on the list that was provided to us public folks last December, I think it was. I'm presuming that list of 40 people is who would carry forward under the 40 under this ordinance. I just want to talk about one of those people. So there's a house not far from me. It was purchased in June of 2021 as an older fixer. The Greene County system says it sold, I think, for like 80, 90K, somewhere in there. It had been vacant for the 5 years now that we've owned our place nearby. So that buyer obtained a permit sometime between that time and December. That person has a permit. He starts renovating on it last year. I don't think they've had a renter yet. Maybe only now. So that person has been sitting on a permit that somebody else who would have shown up on January 1 of last year asking for one could have generated an entire year's worth of rent. How is that fair? By the way, that person that owns that permit doesn't live in Port Orford. So this document I'm seeing now, page 18, at least one of you is considering giving that person another year to make that place rentable. So that guy would have had over 2 years to come up with a property that would have generated a single rental. How is that? That's my second comment. There are 40 people on that list. Of those 40, the Curry County just rate system. You can look up most of those properties, and I think I have the numbers, but approximately 31 of them I think are identifiable on the Greene County system. The other 9 are passed for some reason. But of those, 15 are people that do not live in Port Orford. Their residences are elsewhere in the state. I think 7 of them don't even live in Oregon. So why are we going to put an out-of-state owner's rights ahead of somebody that
30
lives in this
seconds.
town? Okay, that just makes no sense to me. It's not even, is it wise? So if I was in your shoes, I would be worried about litigation from these presumably richer out-of-state people, and I would be worried about trying to get some kind of handle on this problem. You know, I think we're probably towns probably gonna have to suffer, the out-of-state people, but why do we want to do that by punishing ourselves? That makes no sense. You know, we can do better. We can do better than this. That's it.
Thank you.
I'm awake.
Do we have any other public comment? Okay, on to agenda item number 6, public hearing. We have none, so we're moving on to agenda item number 7, planning commission duties, responsibilities, and chain of command. Commissioners, in your packet on page 3 and 4 is the chapter 2.16 from the Port Orford Code that explains the planning commission duties and responsibilities. At the last city council meeting, the city council voted to have a meeting with the chairperson and the mayor to discuss the roles and responsibility of each commission and the communication chain. Unfortunately, we were unable to set up the meeting. We tried twice to no avail. So whomever will be the next chair will be required at some point to meet with the mayor and Jessica to discuss kind of what the ordinance says and the expectations of the planning commission and the chain of command. That was something I think that the council really wanted to make sure, just so there was a clean idea of communication and how things run. And that's kind of what Councilor Webb wanted, correct? Is that was ultimately the?
Yeah, Councilor Webb, and then also, I'm trying to, Pogwitz, both of them.
Well, from one of it. So ultimately, like I said, if you could please review the commission, and then hopefully in the near future, the chairperson of the planning commission with Jessica and Mayor Cox, and perhaps even a councilor, will have a meet and discuss the expectations. Our next item is Greg Thieling's reappointment to the planning commission. That's page 5 for the application. What we would do, commissioners, is we would do a recommendation, because ultimately, if I'm correct, Jessica, the council would be the one to say yea or nay. Am I correct on that?
Yeah.
So do I have a motion to accept Commissioner Thieling's?
Commissioner Lovendall, I make a motion to accept Greg Thielen's application for membership as a commissioner.
Do I have a second?
Second, Commissioner Head, second.
Do I have any discussion? Okay, Commissioner Rossi,
Yes.
Commissioner Head,
Yes.
Commissioner Lovendall,
Yes.
Commissioner Byrne,
Yes.
Commissioner Malone,
Yes.
Commissioner Thielen, I'm pretty sure you have to abstain.
Yes.
Commissioner Narad is a yes, so this will go to the council at the next meeting for approval.
Can I make a comment, Commissioner Byrne? I'd also like to suggest that Commissioner Thielen, once approved, be considered for the chair position.
We are actually doing that down here.
Sorry. Go ahead. Too far.
So for planning matters, commissioners, you have in your packet, ultimately, this is the work between Daniel Kearns and Jessica. Daniel took what we had kind of already written and made suggestions and different pieces like that. So ultimately, we just kind of wanted to talk about review, talk about definitions. There were things that Daniel discussed in there that he thinks that were maybe perhaps not needed, such as home shares. He and Jessica talked about ways to look so we wouldn't have to go to land use pieces on there. So just some different things. Is there any comments, concerns? Anybody see anything they liked, they didn't like?
I have a comment, Commissioner Head. Why would we take out the definition of home share?
So what, I know, sorry. So what Mr. Kern suggested, he asked me if home shares are a problem or we have them here in town. I said, currently I've not had any complaints about them, but that was as far as I had known. And he said, if it's not a problem, then there's no need to fix it. So that's why he asked if it was still in there. So I just kept his comment in there as just to let you guys know, and you guys can verify and talk to him when he comes on and then at 4:30. But that's what he had said. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
But it's not something that we might consider in the future and might want to leave it in there.
Well, and his other comment too, to be honest, was that if it's a hosted home share, the owner's in that property. The owner's there. So if they become loud or the owner is going to step in pretty fast, I'm assuming. I don't think they're going to want to put up with it. So if that's the case, then there's really not a lot on the city side that we can, we'll be able to do if the home, since the owner is required to be there.
But this still has to be regulated as a short-term rental, no? Or does it not qualify then?
It depends, because it would only qualify if it's a 30-day transient short-term rental. But it would, so that would be the only catches I'm thinking. But otherwise, a lot of hosted home shares from what I've seen have been like long-term rentals when someone's looking for a roommate scenario. Because like I said, but I don't know of any here in town. So that's a question I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Lovendall, I have a concern that we might, that defining the home, hosted home, would be good to separate that from short-term rental. And we, I believe, decided that we would include the home share in our short-term as a cap or part of the cap. So, but I don't see any problem with defining what it is in the ordinance. It's not fixing anything, it's just clarifying, and it clarifies maybe the difference between, punctuates that you do have to live there, you do have to be there to be, as opposed to short-term rental. I just don't see the detriment to having it in.
Like I said, that was Daniel's recommendation. And so that's why I put my notes in there to show that that was his recommendation. So again, when he comes on at 4:30, you guys can have that conversation with him and then he'll give you his opinion. But that was his opinion. He said, if it's not broke, don't fix it. If it's, you're just adding extra stuff to it basically at that point. So I said, okay, that's fine. I said, I will put the notes in there and then you guys can talk about it when he comes on. So. Yes, great.
Oh, Commissioner Thielen, I'm sorry. I was
Yes,
listening.
we discussed the home shares at length, and I believe we all wanted it. And we wanted it also, I believe, to be not subject to the cap, which was another comment in here. So I move that we, as a commission, do that.
I think also too, I think you would talk to Daniel because the city council will also has, ultimately the choice and will deny it or approve it. So like I said, I think that's a conversation that you guys should probably have with him, and then he can tell you all that stuff.
I understand that. And I understand that we have a responsibility to do our due diligence and our research and make a proposal. And I think that should be our proposal. That's what our proposal has been, and I think we should stick with it. And if the city council doesn't like it, they can say, don't do it.
Well, and that's the conversation this afternoon I think would be best to have. I mean, that's why it's still in there for a reason. It's still in there because you guys wanted it in there. It's just the notes that were made and told to me are just included in there, just a full disclosure.
So I have made a motion.
What's the motion?
That we keep the home shares in
Can we,
as we had written before.
here's my problem. I'm not quite sure if that's a motion because it is in there. So I think we'd have the motion to take it out. So we don't need to have the motion. It's already.
Okay,
Okay.
I thought it had been taken out.
No, it's still, everything that you see is in there. It's just a comment to say that that's what I was told.
So the one thing too that I saw, and I don't remember where it's at, it talked about how we could limit, and I thought this was a good one about, and I believe it's on page 22. This one. And I wanted to point that out because this was something we kind of struggled over as a commission about who gets what, when, and how. So the lawful pre-existing short-term rentals. And so I just wanted to point that out and see what you all kind of thought about that. In terms of, there have been comments about houses being empty and still using, like the one. And so I'm not quite sure. I personally think that might help with that issue. Commissioner Heck.
Yeah, Commissioner Head, I tend to agree with Mr. Johnson that people that aren't using active licenses shouldn't have them. They should go to people that are going to actively use the license. Also, I don't think licenses for short-term rentals should be granted for bare land. I think that there should be a requirement. Sorry, what?
No, there is not one. She doesn't have one.
Oh, she doesn't have one.
No, she
Okay,
does not.
I thought there was, but in the same vein.
Well, because I think when you say bare land, the first thing that came to my mind is, RVs. Well, I
No,
do think
there's one specifically on Fifth Street that was requested, but it has been closed.
Okay.
She lost that property. She no longer even owns that property.
because I think in here we did say it can't be an RV, so the bare land, I would agree with.
Right.
Okay.
And I don't think that we should, that houses that have current licenses that haven't rented as a short-term rental in the past 12 months should be able to have another year. That's my position on that.
And we talked about that, right, quite a bit.
We
So
did.
I'm hoping that
Yes.
that piece, everybody's kind of like, that kind of fits the discussion we've been having.
So Commissioner Burt, I wonder if we have a license for long-term and short-term, if that might help to resolve this too. So two different licenses.
We don't have one currently, no, because right now, actually, if you have a long-term rental, there isn't
need a
anything.
business license?
Not that I'm aware of, to be honest, because it's not technically, if I remember correctly, I see Commissioner Rossi shaking his head. Because I don't think it's technically, if I remember correctly.
It doesn't have to be registered as a business.
Yeah,
to
it does.
operate. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so there's one other actual code in the code book. I just don't remember what the exact line said. I'd have to look it up, but.
Okay.
And I do also wanted to point out, because this was a topic of discussion quite a bit, that if we were trying to limit things to R1 and R2, it might be land use. If you look on page 9, the first full paragraph, according to Mr. Kearns, that one takes this then out of land use if we only put things into R1 and R2. So that I wanted to make sure I pointed that out.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So on page 9, where it starts the paragraph, it's this first full paragraph. The requirements in this ordinance are not land use regulations. Remember, we had a lot of conversation about that.
Yes.
According to Mr. Kearns, that then helps take that out. So if you look throughout, and if you also look on page 7, under 05.05.010 under the title, it also talks about that. This provisions of this ordinance are intended to authorize the licensing regulation of short-term rentals and residential dwelling units on all properties. That kind of helps that piece as well. So I wanted to point out, because we had a lot of discussion about land use and how we do that. There were some other pieces that we talked about. Specifically, we talked about, well, how do we get things to stay in certain zones? So if you look, like parking, and that was something, parking, and there was something else where it specifically said, I'm sorry, only in, like for proof of residence, would be on page 13 under 05.05.050. If you look at A2, it says proof of residential use, and it says for hosted home shares with only within the R1 and R2 zones. You'll see throughout there, it was specific to certain zones, specifically in the residential, because, and that's just an example, because of what the council was looking at towards with residential zones more than anything. So that was kind of some stuff that Mr. Kearns had also talked about. It's like, if we wanted to make sure it was only in residential, we should put only in the R1 and R2. So there's a few of those in there as well.
Commissioner Rossi, also on page 13, density is mentioned.
Mhm.
And I thought that we had agreed that it's tough to come up with an enforceable and verifiable means of measurement. What are we measuring? Property lines, door to door? Who would take the measurement? I remember this conversation.
So this says that we're operate on a property within 300 feet, closest property boundary to closest property boundary. That's how that would be measured. And the Curry County GIS, even though it's not, 100% accurate, you can get a pretty good measurement on there. There's actually a measuring tool on there to be able to have that. And the only reason I actually have it on here is because I wasn't quite sure if we want to do that in residential zones only or not. Because if you look at the commercial and the 10 and U zones, there are ones that are a lot closer than the 300 feet. And so I did not put the residential and I did not put that it's for residential only in here for that very reason, is we didn't have that conversation. So I wanted to make sure we clarified that today too.
Thank you.
Commissioner Byrne, I have a question on, I think it's page 23C. It's compensation for reasonable investment in a dwelling unit as a STR. Is that something new that was recommended by Mr. Kearns, or did I just miss it before?
This is recommended by him just so that it kind of, it gives them the property owner the opportunity to be able to recoup part of their investment. Actually, you talked about it in the meeting that he had with him, I think 2 months ago. And so he had said that this is a good way to help the landowners that possibly do have to get rid of it to recoup some of their investment first over these few years, and then be able to sell it and go from there.
And who compensates?
The city. According to Daniel from my conversation with Hens, I asked him how often this happened. He has not had one.
Okay, thank you.
Good, Commissioner Lovendall.
Commissioner Lovendall. If someone loses their short-term rental license, it's usually because of cause. It would be because of cause. We're not telling someone that already has a license that they can't have one.
Yes, there are a few people we are telling that to. Number one, RV park. There is an RV that is right now licensed short-term rental. We are telling them, nope, we can't have that anymore.
Where is that?
Here, circle.
Oh.
So then, but were they authorized before?
Long before, long before. They've been there for a while, way before me.
3 years, I think, maybe 4. It was through the previous
They've
city.
been paying STR?
Yeah, I'm 90% sure, yes, they have. 99% sure when I was looking at it earlier today.
And they were not counted in them.
Yeah, they were.
They were counted in them.
Yeah.
So does that mean under the Commissioner Head, under the new ordinance, they would be losing their short-term vacation rental license for the RV?
Yep, automatically.
Okay, so that would take it down to 43.
It would actually take, to be honest, we're going to talk about later today, but the total amount of people that have not paid TLT or do not use their short-term rental license, it brings it down to 33.
Okay, so it opens up 7 more spaces
Yes,
essentially.
yes, it does.
Okay.
And that is within the last year. Some of those have used them, a year and 6 months ago. Some of them have used them, having used them for 3 years.
Right, that's really
So-
good because from the webinar, we learned that it's easier, it's easier to regulate before they exist than it is to roll back. And also he recommended against having parallel sort of situations where you're treating, grandfathering things in and treating some separately than others.
Yeah, so after I went through all the TLT, because we had a bunch that were due this past quarter. So I just used that as my first quarter, first 3 months, and then just back to chart from there to find out who has used it for the last 3 months or 6 months, year, all the way through.
Do we currently have a waiting list?
No, because no one has come in to ask for anything, because they knew the moratorium. I know that I got an email after the last meeting from one of the people that were here. However, at that time, we had not even decided that we were going to do a wait list, and so I informed them of that, so.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Thielen, so if we have 33, or there would be 33 legal, would we not need the 5-year deferred compliance then for that piece?
I would say just keep it just to be safety wise, just to make sure is what Daniel had said. And so I'm just going based upon his recommendations.
Okay. And then on that same subject, I was wondering about the distance requirement between properties, between short-term rentals. I don't quite understand how that, so we had originally suggested that they be grandfathered in until the non-transferable license ends. And with the property being sold or transferred. And I'm wondering, I'm imagining a situation where 2 short-term rentals are within 300 feet of each other and they are all just waiting this 5-year period. What happens at the end of the 5-year period?
Well, that's why I asked if we wanted to do it in just residential zone or not. Because right now in residential zone, if I remember correctly, we don't have any that are within that 300 feet. If we do it outside of the residential zone, then there's a lot of them that are within that.
Oh.
That's why I was just kind of waiting to hear what you guys wanted to do. If I'm just thinking Fifth Street, for example, they're lined up. So,
My concern is not in the commercial zone. My commercial, even out on Lakeshore Drive, there aren't any.
not within 300 feet, if I remember correctly. There's another legal one that we just found out about, and I actually sent a letter today. But that's an illegal one already, so.
Okay.
Maybe,
Go ahead, Commissioner
I
Lovendall.
think in looking at where they are on Lakeshore, they may be within the 300.
I know, yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
checked them all out, but I know
Yeah.
the one I just found was in the middle of 2 of them. And so I knew that that one created that it wouldn't be compliant, even if it is illegal.
It would be difficult to maintain a 300-foot in the commercial zone or 10,
Yeah.
Well, if there was a situation existing on Lakeshore now, I'm just trying to imagine what would happen. Like, so nobody blinks. Is it like a game of chicken? You go through
No,
the
so
5 years?
it actually says in here that if you don't, after that period, if I remember correctly, after that 5 years, then what happens is first come, first served. And then you become the wait list after.
So they would both lose. They would both lose their license, and then one of them would have.
The license is already lost at the end of the year already. So every year, if they don't reapply by that, in that period, then that license is expired, so it doesn't exist anymore.
So
Right.
whoever
So-
applies first
Yeah.
gets the spot.
So at 12:01 or at 8:01 in the morning on the day that's who gets it.
Yeah. And keep in mind, we send out renewal notices in May.
So does that apply to, let's say we have a cap of, if we had a cap of 40 and we have 40 and we have 2 on the waiting list, and the morning of the renewal day, do the 40 get precedent?
The 40, no, what happens is they get their renewal letters. And let's say, they get their renewal letters in May. So people get those. If on July 1st, whoever's not renewed, the next person on that list is then granted, because January 30th is when those licenses
So if they
expire.
have not renewed by
By July 1st.
July 1st. Thank you.
Because June 30th is when the licenses expire.
Thank you.
I have a question, Commissioner Head. So, this might be nitpicky, but suppose you get on July 1st, more than 40?
Mhm.
And people how are they putting them in the box outside the city, or how are they?
90% of them actually come in because they like to fuck out with their license.
Right, okay.
But again, this past year, I'm gonna say we had, of all the business licenses, probably 75% of them come in before, starting in May. And so we start processing them the minute that
Oh,
we get
you
them.
start processing,
Yeah,
okay,
because I
sorry.
have to sign every single one of them and review every single one of them and seal every single one of them.
Right, I see, I thought you were holding until like the first and then, okay.
No, we start
I see.
processing them the first time we get the renewal.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Thiel, I'd like to review or go back to the home shares. And I'm not sure if it was in our records that we wished for them to be not subject to the cap, which I think is an important piece of information. And that's really the true reason why we would have hosted home shares, I believe, because it doesn't take the house out of circulation for long-term residency.
Mhm.
So if it's not in there, I would propose that we
Can somebody,
put it in.
I'm trying to think, where does it specifically, does anybody know specifically where it say the cap?
Right here. It is right here, 0505040.
Ooh, Annual short-term.
It's on the top of the next page.
Which page is
Top of the
that?
next page. Oh, cap on page 13.
So I mean, somewhere in there, we could put,
I can easily.
like, hosted home shares are
Yeah,
not subject to this cap somewhere in there.
Is that something we all agree on?
Yes.
I agree,
Yeah.
and I also think that also punctuates why we need to define specifically what a home share is.
Mhm.
Because the criteria to establish residency is in here. So that piece of it's there.
And do you want it to add the residential zone only to the density limit too? I just wanted to make sure.
I would think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all we're really dealing with
Okay.
here.
Now, on page 11, I do think, Sarah, when you said we need the definition, it is on there, on page 11. Hosted home share means transient rent. Means the transient rental of a portion of a dwelling while the homeowner is present. Are we okay with that definition? Okay. Any other discussion? Commissioner Head?
Commissioner Head, I have a question about the off-street parking. There's a comment here on page 16. If there are multiple friends or families coming from various places, there might be 6 cars for 6 people. Maybe we should only have, and then it refers to, what does that refer to? Can you explain that a little bit, Jessica?
That just goes back towards the following page where it says off-street parking spaces required for R1 and R2 only. 1 off-street vehicle space is required per bedroom in accordance with of this ordinance. All of the required notices and place cards required by this ordinance shall require the renters to park on site and not park on the street, even if on-street parking is otherwise available. So rather than, it kind of breaks it down and makes it a little bit easier to follow, I think, if that makes sense, is a good way to put it. Because what Daniel was worried about when he read that is, let's say we have, 6 friends that come in from all around town, all around the country and meet together for girls' weekend, whatever it is. Well, they're all coming from everywhere. They're all driving, so they're all 6 cars. So, but they can share a bedroom. I mean, because there might be a 2 double bed, a twin or a double or something like that. So that kind of not ruins, but that kind of makes an issue for the parking at that point.
Well, I mean, if there were only a certain amount, aren't we regulating the density of the allowable number of people based on the bedrooms?
Yes, if I remember correctly, we are, but still, if we do that, we're saying that people come in multiple cars. We're saying right here, 1 per bed. What if each bedroom has a bedroom, 2 parking spots, 2 adults in there, or 2 beds?
Right.
That's what he was asking, because he's had a few different ones that have had, 2 doubles in a room or something like that, and that kind of messes with that. So that was his point.
Okay.
So can you explain what that suggestion would do if we only relied on the 080?
It just brings it back to at least only 1 is required. Oh, sorry, 80, yeah. So it says that 1 off-street vehicle space is required per bedroom. So that's 1. You see where?
Well, because if you look at 1605.05.070, it says no more than one vehicle per bedroom will be allowed. Whereas the 05.05.080 says one
Oh.
off-street vehicle space.
So in my own words, you're saying then that a certain number of cars are required for the number of bedrooms, but if other people show up,
Or they have they have a friend's weekend, a golf weekend. I mean, I've known people go on golf outings with their buddies.
Yeah.
And it's not like 5 or 6 cars and they're all driving because they're coming from everywhere. And so with the one vehicle per bedroom versus this, that kind of, if you have 2 beds in the one bedroom, you might have 2 drivers.
So you're saying we would basically decrease the parking requirement? And
That was the only way that we could think about it,
Hmm.
but I don't know what else. That was his suggestion.
so it would decrease the parking requirement. So this is complaint driven, obviously. I mean, I cannot imagine a situation where we would have no one parking on the street, even though it's,
Oh, I have 3 rentals near my house that park on the street. I had 5 cars on the street the other day.
I tend to agree with you. We should have I believe we should have the parking for each bedroom and leave it at that.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And if they have more drivers, I mean, they know ahead of time, they
gotta be able
only
to-
have so many vehicles at that place. And we did at one time mention that you can't park in the front yard. That's not in here, that you can't just pull into the front yard, and fill it up with cars.
I don't know. Well, they have to show what the parking, in here, one of the requirements is showing what your parking is. So the picture, if it's in a garage, then they have to take a picture of the garage that they can park in there.
Well,
And so they have to show those items.
but the one that he says to take out says, if the garage is used to meet parking requirements, a photo of the interior of the garage shall be.
It's actually already listed over here. I thought about that.
Where's it at?
Hold on one second. Number 1, it's written on the good neighbor policy first. Parking parked vehicles may not block driveways, bike lanes, emergency vehicle access lanes.
Page 20.
Other means.
Page 20. We should put in there,
Should something be added there, no on-street parking?
Hold on, it's also somewhere else. I'm just looking for it. I remember seeing it, but I will find it.
we should also put in there, parked vehicles may not block driveways, bike lanes, or emergency access lanes, nor may they park on front lawns or something like that.
On front lawns, also just simply say no on-street parking.
It's somewhere in here.
I did see it.
I did too. I just can't see it.
I've seen it a lot.
Oh, it says it right under that one. I'm sorry, the same one that's 050508. On-street parking required one of the.
that's page 17.
Page 17,
It
yes.
says, all the required notices and place cards required by this ordinance shall require the renters to park on site and not park on the street, even if on-street parking is otherwise available.
But where does it say, because the one that he wanted, that he said we should take out, does say that, if a garage is used to meet parking, so this is 0505.070 D. If a garage is used to meet parking requirements, a photo of the interior of the garage shall be submitted at the time.
This one, site plan and floor plan. 0505050, number 4, it says the site.
Hold on. 050.
050, that's page 13.
Yeah, it's page, number 4, it says, under site plan and floor plan, it says location, dimension of parking spots, including dated photos of interior, exterior parking spaces. The floor plan shall show in rough dimensions the location and dimensions of all the
Okay.
bedrooms and stuff like that. So we have to show that.
Oh, that's actually page 14 on number 4.
14, yeah, number 4, site and floor plan and floor plan. So commissioners, I guess the question would be, do we want to keep on page 16 on the 05.05.070, do we want to keep D or would we like to take D out of it? And just keep the 05.05.80?
Let's see which one's which.
I think we could take it out.
Okay,
That's kind of what we said.
okay,
As long as we're providing parking for the one per bedroom plus the one. I mean, keeps it simple.
well, so my question then on the 05.05.8080 is on B. It says one off-street vehicle space is required per bedroom in accordance with section 05.05.070. This one says we should take it off. So would we want to maybe put one off-street vehicle space is required per bedroom plus one? You see what I'm saying? It kind of goes back and forth.
Well,
So if we take out D, then somehow we have to reword B.
Combine.
Yeah,
that's a lawyer before.
pardon,
Oh, can you repeat yourself?
Commissioner Malone.
Per bedroom period.
Per
And then that
bedroom.
finishes, and then you get rid of in accordance with section blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
We could do per bedroom, and then do we want to do the additional parking space plus an additional parking space per daytime guest? Do you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You mean a lot of off-street parking
blah.
for the
Yeah,
bigger
I mean,
homes?
if you then add in the per person who comes during the day, that's 4 spaces for a 3-bedroom house.
Mhm.
That's, I don't know which houses have that around here. I look around, they barely have 1 or 2.
It's true.
Yeah, I'll point out, nowhere in this code is off-street parking required in any zone for anybody,
Mhm.
in any zone.
Mhm.
The only parking requirement in this code concerns commercial businesses and where it would be located.
I mean,
But it's
it just
not
seems like a
required.
tremendous burden to put on these rentals to have that many spaces.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the coin, having cars everywhere on the street around your home all the time, coming and going is a huge burden on the local residents.
Agreed.
There's gotta be
I
something.
endorse that.
4 spaces for a 3-bedroom house.
I mean, then do we want to not do, we just want to say one off-street vehicle per bedroom, period?
Without the extra.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know why everyone would put in that extra anyway, if they're leaving after they spend the day there. It's not an overnight space.
That's true.
so do we want to then on page 17, B, 05.05.080, just put one off-street vehicle space is required per bedroom, period? Is that what we're looking at?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
Okay, and then would we like to get rid of then? Okay, so then we would like to get rid of 05.05.070D. Okay,
Yeah.
and ultimately, we're just cleaning up the wording.
It's the same. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very redundant.
Commissioner Thielen, I have one more, one that I'd like to bring up. Mr. Johnson, the speaker, this morning, this afternoon, brought up a good point about, and that is something we've considered is having owners show that they've used their license in a specified number of days in the last year in order to renew. Should we put this in the ordinance and set the number at 30 days like other towns have? In other words, you can't just hold a license. This is a competitive market and it's not, I don't think it's fair to have someone who could just have a license and not use it if other people want to have it.
Well, if you look on 22, page 22 on 05.05.100 under lawful pre-existing short-term rentals, you know, it says, 1, to qualify as a lawful pre-existing short-term rental, the property owner must be able to demonstrate the following with credible evidence, satisfactory.
I'm sorry, can you say where you are again?
I'm on page 22 under A. So 05.05.100.
Yes.
So go to A, it says lawful pre-existing short-term rental. To qualify as a lawful pre-existing short-term rental, the property owner must be able to demonstrate the following with credible evidence satisfactory of the city administrator. One, the short-term rental has a license during the 12 months preceding the adoption of the ordinance. Two, so it's not, you have to hit all three. Two, proof of short-term rental has been rented during the 12 months preceding adoption of this ordinance for a verifiable number of nights. And three, the short-term rental owner has paid the transient lodging tax during the 12 months preceding the adoption of this ordinance for a verifiable number of nights. So if you're
Yes.
not renting, you don't pay the transient lodging tax. Because I wondered that too. So automatically, if you don't pay the transient lodging tax, even if you have a short-term rental, you don't get that.
And I think that's the criteria for getting the initial license. But I think for renewals, I'm talking about for renewals.
I think it's for renewals also because we can ask Jessica, because I thought that too. I think this is for renewal, pre-existing. That's for renewals also. So we can ask for, because I thought that too. But according to her, the section shall govern the implementation and applicability of this ordinance to short-term rentals that are lawfully established, registered, and operating on the date. So operating to me is also renewal.
Well, operating on the date of this ordinance. That's why I think it's pre-existing. I don't think it's dealing with.
Hold on. Thank you. We can ask that because I wondered that too, but we can ask if that language is there because I said, would this be for any year? And according to her, what Daniel, because this is written by Daniel, this then goes for any renewal. So if you have one, I wish she was here.
I
don't know where she
understand
went.
that. And from looking at other codes, many other codes specify that you have to have used it 30 days in the year.
Mhm. So that was the key piece too, where it said verifiable. That's what I did. I mean, do we want to say verifiable would be 30 days? Because that's what, I think that leaves it open
Commissioner
to.
Head, yeah, I think we could add that in there.
Because verifiable is awfully squishy.
Yeah.
So I will talk to her when she comes back. We can say, verifiable, we can use verifiable 30 days within the previous year. Is that kind of what
Well,
we're thinking
yes, and
about?
the TLT records are pretty clear.
Mhm.
That's a verifiable.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, because she had said, because I asked, is it one or of the three or all three? And she said it's all three. So if we do have one that has that particular, has a license, but
Actually,
pay it.
reading this, it says that are lawfully established, registered, and operating on the date of the adoption. So this would not apply to any of them after the date of the adoption.
Okay, let's ask her that then as well. Because I would agree. I think that you have to use it prior. I did ask about verifiable. I would ask her if she was in here. I think she was maybe wanting to know if we wanted to just put verifiable as the word or if we wanted to put a number.
Commissioner Head, I have another comment. It's sort of along the lines of one of Mr. Johnson's other comments and also was addressed in the short-term rental webinar. I'm not sure how many people were able to see that, but talked about not allowing LLCs or commercial entities to operate vacation rentals. I think we could apply that maybe just to the residential and not to the 10MU or the commercial zones. I'm interested to hear people's thoughts on that.
Commissioner Thielen, I think that would be a huge change from where we're headed. I think that's usually what is associated with home shares, with cities like Hood River that only do home shares. I think we're allowing freestanding short-term rentals, and it's as a business. I think it would be. It doesn't make sense.
Another thing they mentioned was capping the number. That would effectively cap, the owner would have to be a natural person, and also capping the amount of short-term rentals that one person could have, operate, own.
And I have seen those. I have seen ordinances like that. It's a bit of a departure from where we're headed, but it could happen, I guess.
Commissioner Byrne, I have not seen in our draft here anything that addresses the maximum number of days in residential zones where STRs can operate. And I know some cities do that. They cap it at like 90 days out of the year.
That was something
So-
Hood River does, I think. Right?
Hood
3 months?
River doesn't, yeah, but they don't have freestanding home shares
Right.
or freestanding short-term rentals.
Mhm.
Cannon Beach does it.
Yeah. Right.
They're very, under a lot of pressure there. A huge number of their homes are rentals. So there's a lot of pressure.
So commissioners, I don't want to stop this discussion because I think it's good, but we do need to move on because we have about 9 minutes left before the workshop and we have a couple other things to go. So we're going to move down to other business, so vote for chairperson. Do I have a motion for any nominations? Commissioner Lovendall,
Make a motion to nominate Greg Thielen as chair of the Waterford Planning Commission.
do I have a second?
Commissioner Head, second.
Do I have any discussion? Okay, Commissioner Rossi,
Yes.
Commissioner Head,
Yes.
Commissioner Lovendall,
Yes.
Commissioner Burns,
Yes.
Commissioner Malone,
Yes.
Commissioner Thielen.
Yes.
Commissioner Narad is a yes, so Commissioner Thielen will be the chairperson for the Planning Commission for the next go-around. Congratulations.
Thank you, Krista. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen, and I hope you will be open to advice.
We don't read your emails at night. So I have the city planner has no comments. Do we have any other planning commissioner comments?
Regarding the STR?
No, just in
Oh,
general. Okay. Any other public considerations? Okay, I'm going to adjourn the Port Orford Planning Commission meeting now at 4:23. We will come back at 4:30 for the workshop, so that gives us a 7-minute kind of break. So thank you all very, very much. But other than that,
Awesome.
I asked Jessica, I was like, who's working on it? She said AM, so I can do that all. Yeah. Why not?
This conference will now be recorded.
You wouldn't mind starting us off here, maybe give us a brief overview on your recommendations and how you got there? Maybe I fell on it too quickly into the meeting. Well, we can tap him second too. So I will move the planning commission. I don't know if you want to go around robin.
I've got a couple comments I can make.
Okay, yeah, just an overview on.
Yeah, a little history maybe.
Exactly.
Okay, so we got started about a year ago on this. We started doing research. We looked at Curry County rules on short-term rentals. There, a lot of this stuff is pretty standard. We looked at Hood River. We kind of chose the way Hood River did it because they tend to go not through land use planning. They go through the city business licenses, which is what Mr. Kearns recommended. We now have about 700 housing units in town. 10% are vacation rentals. So everybody kind of wanted to do something about it. We chose a cap and a distance requirement between the properties, which is one way to lower the numbers and the density. Hood River has actually made it so you can't have a freestanding short-term rental and you have to have a hosted home share. We are not going that strict, and so that the existing short-term rentals could exist up to a cap. We recommended a cap of 40. Home shares are a plus because in a home share, you share your home with a visitor. And the plus of that is that the home remains a long-term, a place where people can live a full year throughout the year, which is good for the fire department. It's good for the town. This is a pretty standard ordinance, as I said, except for parking, which generally applies in all areas, but you guys didn't tell us you wanted us to do that. So we're throwing that back to you. What you want to do for parking in the commercial zone and the 10 and U, that's what, we don't know what you want to do. So I think it should I think it'd be short-sighted to pass over that. We should look at it. And if you'd like us to, we will make a recommendation. We would do that. We made some small amendments today in the draft and we can get into that later if you want. But this is a work in progress. So we're still working on it, and we want your input because you guys are the ones that are going to sign off in the end. So we don't want to do anything you don't want.
Excellent. And then, so we do definitely want to get back to those changes probably before we get too much into the council questions. Would he be available to?
Yeah, he's ready.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we'll be able to have better if we just want to tell us his recommendations in line.
Okay.
Move on.
Can I make a quick comment, Commissioner Head?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the cap of 40 in the residential zones, a lot of places are regulating based on percentage of short-term rentals as a function of the total number of residences, and 40 is substantially higher. I think it's 9% in the residential. Most ordinances regulate at 3% cap. So 40 is a lot higher than what most other towns are doing.
You must have sounded like you're starting when you were
Yeah.
talking about that.
I just wanted to clarify.
No, I love it when there's math equations involved with it. Mr. Kearns, please, hello. Thank you for coming. I hope you can hear us a little bit better, and I think we can hear you. So if you want to give us a quick overview on your recommendations, and not the why, I know the why is because of your experience. So it's great to see you.
Okay, sure. Can people hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. There are a couple of things. First of all, what I'm working from is I saw a list of issues that I saw that people from the Planning Commission City Council meeting wanted to see in a set of regulations. And I saw a preference for zoning regulations. Do you want me to go over my recommendations of why I don't recommend zoning, but rather if you want to regulate STRs, do so as a business licensing matter? Is that an important thing? Or are we?
Yes, please, that's an important part of it.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay, sure. A lot of some jurisdictions opt to regulate STRs as a land use matter, and it's kind of an understandable thing. The preliminary question is like, these appear to be commercial uses in a residential zone. How can that be allowed? And why don't we just, regulate them as commercial uses and not allow them? And in my experience, I urge people to kind of resist that for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you regulate STRs as a land use matter in your development code, you're going to be stuck with following all the state land use procedural requirements for amending your code and for issuing permits of that sort. You might also be in a position of having to require home occupation permits and kind of draw commercial versus residential distinction. And I think you can do that, but as I mentioned, it raises a bunch of kind of procedural hurdles that you have to get through. Plus also, if you were to restrict or prohibit STRs, you've got a bunch of them that are currently licensed in, or allowed at least in, residential zones. If you kind of ratify that or prohibit that, change that situation, you have to deal with your non-conforming use provisions of your code. And it's a really big issue for counties because state law dictates how that happens. You would be stuck with just your non-conforming use provisions in your code and have to deal with them in that sense. And I haven't reviewed them in detail, but it's my understanding people are allowed to continue non-conforming uses and could possibly modify or expand them if they follow procedures. But basically, it's more difficult to extinguish non-conforming uses if you regulate them as land uses. So it's just so much easier to, first of all, require anyone operating a STR to get a license. And so that ensures that you subject them all to your operational requirements that are supposed to address nuisance impacts. So you've got to have garbage, have a local registered agent or someone who can address problems when they crop up. You can have parking requirements, a whole host of operational issues they would be subject to, and those are designed to deal with livability issues and make them compatible with neighbors. So those would be requirements of maintaining your license, and if you violate those, you jeopardize your license. And if you don't have a license, you cannot operate. And so it's basically that simple. If you go through a land use process and you have a permit process for that, land use permits are generally viewed as kind of permanent property rights that go on indefinitely. Licenses, however, and the way you've got this set up, are just permission to operate, permission to engage in the use, and they have to be renewed annually. And each time they renew, they've got to demonstrate compliance with the then current requirements. So for the position I'm in mostly with most of my clients is to come up with a set of workable regulations. And in doing that, I try to keep my client, the city or the county, in the driver's seat in that regard, so that you can decide what you want to do, allow them, disallow them, regulate them, those sorts of things, without a whole lot of additional procedures that you might have to go through or would mess up in trying to regulate and kind of run afoul of these procedural requirements. So it just makes it more simple and straightforward to regulate these things as a business license matter, and that includes curtailing them if you decide to do that. And that's entirely a policy choice that you can make, and you've had a little discussion about that, whether to set caps or use some other mechanism to limit the numbers. The rubber really hits the road in a legal sense if you want to reduce the current pool size. So that's not an insurmountable hurdle, mind you. It just makes it logistically difficult, and you have to be careful about how your ordinance is administered if the ordinance is going to bring about a reduction in the current number of STRs. So that's a big policy decision you have to think about. And if you want to reduce the current number, you've got to do it pretty carefully. As I might have mentioned in the past, there are two primary reasons to undertake a regulatory program. First of all, is if there are nuisance problems with the nearby residential neighbors, that they're having trouble sleeping in the middle of the night when there are loud parties, or people laughing and yelling and talking, or a lot of car activity, people parking all over the place, or garbage being strewn about. Whole number of nuisance impacts. The second reason to regulate them is if you are experiencing a shortage of affordable and available housing in the community, where there are people who want to live and work in Port Orford can't find a place to live, or they can't find one that's affordable. It's not clear to me that there's a direct relationship between STRs and a lack of affordable and available housing. What I do know is that every short-term rental by definition is not available for long-term lease, and also it's not affordable on the same basis as long-term rentable properties are. If you eliminate all the STRs in your community, are you going to increase the availability of housing for long-term residency? Probably. Are you going to make housing cheaper? Well, it'll be cheaper than the rate for short-term rentals. May not be particularly affordable as a long-term rental. So that connection is less clear, but for sure, regulations like this are very effective at addressing livability nuisance problems associated with STRs. And quite frankly, if every STR, for lack of a better expression, behaved themselves, or at least their tenants were super scrupulous about following all the operational rules, then really in practical terms, you walk down the street, you wouldn't be able to identify houses that were short-term rented and houses that were long-term rented or owner occupied. They wouldn't have a ton of cars. They wouldn't be super noisy. There wouldn't be bags of garbage and beer cans all over the place. They would be, in theory, indistinguishable from the surrounding houses. And so, because that's not the case, you kind of ratchet down the regulations. And if that doesn't work, if there still is not great compliance, or your enforcement mechanism isn't so great, then you may be forced to ratchet down further and reduce the pool size, reduce the number of STRs. But as I mentioned, that kind of enters into a realm where you have to be much more cautious and careful about crafting these regulations and crafting that kind of reduction process, how that comes about, how it's done administratively, and how it's done to avoid claims of uncompensated takings, those sorts of things. So that's the basis, or the basic lowdown on my recommendation here. I'd be happy to address some specific questions if you have about the recommendation.
Yes, hopefully we can get through the sound system here. Counselors, do you have any questions for Mr. Kearns?
Just you have had an opportunity to interact with him a little bit, and we haven't, so definitely want to give him an opportunity.
I didn't catch that. You might have to translate.
I'm waiting for someone to ask a question, so I'll go ahead and start. One thing that I'll be asking everyone is, do you see any outstanding issues that still need to be resolved in your experience, Mr. Kearns?
You mean it as relative to this draft ordinance?
Yeah, as far as wrapping it up or tying everything together.
No, it deals with all the livability issues, and also it doesn't appear to reduce the pool size. So I think that's where the cap was set. Understand, if you do bump into a situation where the pool size is higher than the cap, then you're kind of faced with, how is that reduction going to come about? One way you could do it is have the cap apply only to new license applications, and the renewals would not be subject to the cap. And therefore, over time, you might have existing licensed STRs kind of go out of business, and and drop out of the pool. That would bring the pool down to the cap size. The other way is that there are probably a certain number of licensed STRs in the community that really aren't operating. And so you can give this kind of grandfathered status only to actively operated STRs. And if they haven't rented in the past year, then they don't get the protection and they would be subject to the cap. So those, what I focus on mostly are these kind of implementation requirements. There are a couple other ways to, if you want to kind of reduce the magnitude of the impact, and anywhere that you see a number in this draft, like number of parking spaces, number of bedrooms, number of occupants, number of nights that a house can be rented, those are all, subject to your adjustment as a matter of policy. How much is too much? How much is just right? And so those are all fair game and are very effective at kind of reducing the magnitude of the impact of STRs on existing neighborhoods. Also, I think this only applies to residential zones. As I mentioned, I try to keep these things from being land use regulations. And I think just mentioning zones, so these regulations apply in residential zones generally, and don't apply in commercial zones. I don't think that would convert this thing into a land use regulation. I think it's still acceptable, and there are some LUBA cases out there where LUBA found that just referencing the zoning does not convert this into a land use regulation. But it's something to kind of be conscious of as you craft this thing. So that's an acceptable thing, to have it hinge off of what the zoning is, especially if it's residential generally versus commercial generally. The other thing that I always recommend, and you've got this in here, is these are pretty profitable businesses. And so if you are going to have a program with some administration, maybe some monitoring, some enforcement, there are going to be city expenses, and you shouldn't have your general fund take a hit for that. But rather, this should be kind of a self-supporting program. And so you should figure out, basically how much money is generated by these, and set your fee structure according to what your costs are, and with some sensitivity to the profitability of these things. And so that's why in here there's a license fee schedule that sets kind of minimums. I generally don't put license fee amounts in ordinances. Those should be set by resolution on an annual basis by the council whenever you set all of your fees. But it's a useful thing for you to be aware of, because to know basically the magnitude of the fees, so you know how much money the program could be generating. And some communities, especially counties that have a large number of these STRs, they generate hundreds of thousands, almost $1 million, which is a significant contribution to the annual budget. And a lot of that are these fees, and not so much the transient lodging tax. As you know, under state law, transient lodging tax, I think a significant proportion of that has to go to tourism and basically the Chamber of Commerce. But these licensing fees can go to running your program. And so get a good feel for what your program costs to run. And that involves, monitoring to make sure you have captured everyone who is operating. You can subscribe to these companies that'll sniff out the internet to find people who are renting that aren't on your list of licensed operators. So every week or every month, you can get a list of people who are out there operating without a license. You can send them letters and tell them you've got to get a license. Here's how you do it, blah, blah, blah. And so it's easier to get a good feel for your universe of STR operators. And also, if you have an enforcement program, this should be not, it's a real problem in counties where there seems to be just the county sheriff, but who does the enforcement, and they generally don't like to, do civil code enforcement. Your local police may be more interested and willing to do that. Local police, city police generally are, You might also have a specific civil enforcement officer who may or may not be a sworn peace officer to do code enforcement, to operate, especially in the STR realm, weekend evenings and at night, because guess what? The bulk of the violations happen after 5 and on weekends when it's very hard to do enforcement. So those are important parts of the program. When people come in for their annual license renewal, their track record should be part of that evaluation, and you should have a program or part of your program that if you have a certain number of violations, you lose your license. You can't renew it. So, as I mentioned, if everyone operated their STR in a super responsible way and had great communication with their neighbors and great communication with their tenants as they come in before they leave, their homes and drive to Port Orford, and they understood completely when the quiet hours were and the maximum number of cars allowed and all that stuff, we wouldn't be here talking about this, I don't think. So those are important elements of this program.
That's the big thing. It's almost like we have such a concern for housing, like there hasn't been a huge rash of complaints of vacation rentals getting out of hand, just scrambling to try to get an angle for more housing. And it seems like just the process will help with holding people to these stipulations. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Kearns?
I have some, just a specific thing, but I wonder if we should get into some specifics about this. I don't know how much did Mr. Kearns look at this specific ordinance?
He has seen it. We talked about it a few times, actually. We thought we did a final review last week after the third or fourth time that we've gone through it.
Okay. Can I bring something up at the planning commission? Do you mind? Well, Mr. Kern is here. We had a question under 05.05.100. That is page 22. Well, he's here. We might as well ask, right? Under A, where it says lawful pre-existing short-term rentals, the question would become, would letter A with the 1, 2, 3, where you'd have to have 1, 2, 3 in order to be able to renew, would that be for all vacation rentals or only ones that are established, registered, and operating on the date of adoption of this?
Let's see, which section was that again?
05.05.100, implementation of this ordinance and application to short-term rentals operating licenses on the date of its adoption. So
okay.
The question became in the planning commission meeting. And this is Commissioner Neerock, by the way. I forgot you can't see. Would the A only be for pre-existing short-term rentals on the date of the adoption, or would it be of the ordinance, or would it be for all short-term vacation rentals? So for example, let's say we get one on August 1st, 2023, and it rents for the whole year, gets its renewal, and then doesn't rent for the next year. Would it automatically, because it was not a short-term vacation rental on the date of adoption of the ordinance, would it fall under that particular section? That was a question that came up in the planning commission.
Okay, that section, it's designed to deal with implementation of this new program. If you adopted this set of regulations, new licensees would be subject to it as well as renewals. And so, for example, they would the renewals would bump into this cap. And I think if you set a cap of 40, or if you set the cap slightly below your current level, someone's going to get not renewed. And so this was designed to make it so that if you're already in the pool, if you're already operating, and you've got a license, that you won't be subject to the cap. And so that's all this section is designed to do. And so, and that's at basically well, if someone, say you adopt this on day one, and it sets in time at that point, who all is considered a lawful pre-existing short-term rental as of that date. And so if someone comes in during the first year and applies for their first license, they would be subject to the cap, and they could only get the license if there was room under the cap to issue it. Whereas in that first year, someone comes in to renew, if they qualify as the lawful pre-existing short-term rental, they would not be subject to the cap. So if one of these renewals was someone who actually wasn't renting for the 12 months prior to adoption, they wouldn't qualify as a lawful pre-existing short-term rental, and they would be subject to the cap. That's how it's supposed to work. Does that make sense?
It does. So then my next question to you would be, let's say that this is 3 years down the road and a person has a short-term vacation rental that they got as a license, but they decide not to rent it for that year. Would you suggest then we have something in the code that has something like this, that if you're not literally renting it, even if you are under the cap, if you're not renting it, you automatically lose in the preceding year, that you automatically are unable to renew your license, you have to do again as a new or initial?
I don't think that would be a bad idea. First of all, that would be an easy thing to verify. Going forward, months, years down the road, you could tell if someone comes in for renewal if they've been renting. And if you had a provision in here that you can only renew and get your renewal license if you actually used your license during the preceding 12 months, you could put that in here. If you are if the pool size is well under the cap, then it probably doesn't matter, because they could just, all right, so I'm not a lawful pre-existing use because, or I'm not eligible for renewal because I didn't rent it. There's still room under the cap, so I'll make a new application. There's no difference. Give me my license anyway. So it all depends on where you set the cap relative to the pool size. See what I mean?
Mr. Kearns, I have a question. This is Commissioner Head. Isn't this covered under 05.05.100A2? Or does this have to, on
Yes.
page 22?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. This is just for whether you're considered a lawful pre-existing short-term rental for purposes of that, for being held harmless from the cap, because
And the reason,
it talks about 12 months preceding adoption of the ordinance. If you want it to be something that is part of the package of every renewal every year going forward, then you would just modify this so that to
Yes.
qualify for renewal, you got to use your license.
So when we say use your license, I think a commercial vessel has to land fish one time every year, every 2 years.
A small amount.
So in other words, one of these houses would just have to rent one night a year.
Yeah, it'd be pretty easy for them to do that.
Councilor Pogwitz, we were considering that they would have to rent 30 days in the previous year. Yeah.
So so we don't find out, because in any of the stuff that they have to turn in, they do not have to tell us how many days it's been rented. The TLT tax ordinance just says a dollar value, not how many days it's been rented. And then we can't backtrack to figure out the days because the prices change drastically from weekend to weekend.
Probably
Well,
could
here-
do a dollar amount either.
here it says though that you have to provide proof of that you've rented it.
But that's for pre-existing, not for other renewals. So
Right.
so that's the question.
So
So
renewal's a renewal, right? Whether it's pre-existing or not.
Well, they have to.
Once you get your first.
Well, if they want to say that they used it, so if they want to say the 30 days, then we need to figure out how they can show me the 30 days that it was rented.
Right.
Because I don't get that information already on the TLT.
Yeah, you get like
Yeah.
a full report.
Yeah.
So could we put a monetary value on it?
That would
Like
be. up
just
to the
good, so
commission.
because you get that number for the TLT anyway.
Mhm.
We put the onus on them to provide the
Yeah.
documentation that they did, in fact, rent it for 30 days. They have to bring it to you.
So we can, I will have, because we have straight on companies that send us information. And so we'd have to call Airbnb, not Airbnb, but Vrbo and all those places, they are the ones that file the tax returns for those places. So we'd have to work with them and see what we can get.
Well, can't you work with the agent? Because we're talking about the agent here, the applicant and all that stuff, who,
They wouldn't have that information because it would be, from what my understanding is that, I don't know if they would have the exact amount of days that it would be rented, because that goes through the system that they have, I guess, supposedly. Sometimes I've heard people, they don't even know that it's been rented that weekend until like the day before. So I'm not quite sure how that coincides. I don't even know what information they received, to be honest. So I don't know.
you think that they would get money, and so they would get a certain amount of receipts for how many nights. So that would be something to look into. We should be able to find that out.
Other towns are doing it too, so.
Commissioner Burt, anyone who uses a service like that has a calendar that, so that would be proof right there. Right.
You just go online and see it on the calendar.
So that would work for the people that use those venues, but some of these vacation rental people do it on their own and advertise it on. So you're not going to catch everything. It's not that difficult to be fraudulent. So what I'm trying to say is we just need to put a number out there and hope people are honest, but we all know there's going to be somebody, that's going to figure out a way around it. There's always a way around it. I mean, that's why we have illegal marijuana grows probably all over this county. So the same thing. So this is true. What if we turned it into a math problem where if we said, take the number 30 days, for example, if we just said a minimal, that it rented a place for $100 a night, I know it's probably more. Take that times 100, 30 times 100 is 3,000. If our TLT is 7% of that, if we collect $210, we have to collect $210. We collect $210, you're in. That's about all you're going to be able to do is what I'm getting at. Yeah. So we're going to have to be happy getting the TLT monies and hope that people play the game fairly.
That's the story of our life with everything, though,
You're absolutely right.
Do everything we can so that we can.
If there's a loophole, it will be exploited.
Yeah, but I mean, one of our goals with this is to try to do a really good job and not, I mean, we have a long history of ordinances in our city where there's 8 million loopholes. We're trying to create one that is good. So that's the aspiration.
That's one of the big appeals of it being a business license regulated thing, because there's, like, as soon as you put the business with it, then there's a lot more teeth to it, and it's more preemptive for us trying to chase things out. And the more we find numbers and things like that, then the less gray area, the better. Any other questions for Mr. Kearns? I have one question. I don't know who it applies to, and I don't mean to be the grammar police, but section 05054040, A, license must be obtained. The second sentence, the permission to operate a short-term rental in the city of Port Orford is embodied in a license may be revoked for a failure to obtain. So if you read that sentence, there's something missing. Maybe the license embodied a license that may be revoked. Is it the word that that's missing between
There's a that
license
earlier.
and may?
There's a that earlier.
Which one are you reading, Mayor Pat?
The second sentence of 0505. It's just my brain is having a hard time assimilating, which is not abnormal when it comes to legalese, but
It's like the longest sentence ever.
There's a that in there, but, there's a lot of like little grammar things in this that I think maybe I would like to suggest maybe we go to the big questions that we have to discuss, and then we could send in notes to, like, I've got a bunch of little grammar things and missing commas and jazz that, if you don't mind, is that okay?
is that clear to you though? Like, what does that?
It's a
I'm
lot.
just asking about the statement,
I think it's that is in kind of maybe an unusual place, not where you would put it
We
in
can
speech,
go back to that.
right? Am I interpreting that correctly?
That's how I see it. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's like that is earlier, so. it's
Right,
kind of
it's
weird.
not how you would say it in speech, that's legalese.
Yeah, either way, yeah, but it's an easy fix or an easy legal out. I just had to.
This is the way it says, Pat, if you say the permission that is embodied in a license may be revoked. It's just got some words in there that gets a little bit confusing. So I have heard the outstanding issues so far are Greg has identified parking in the commercial and 10 MU zone. I don't know if the cap number is an outstanding issue or if everybody's comfortable with that, because it does sound like it's a little bit of a reduction in the pool, right?
Commissioner Head, no, we agreed on 40 and it's not a reduction. Yeah.
So don't we have 43? Don't we have 43?
No, because what it is, so once they become the pre-existing requirements that we have to show that they're law abiding, it then brings it down to 31, because there's a bunch of them that have licenses that do not use them. And so they have not paid TLT in over a year.
Okay.
But to define that question and put an exclamation point on it, that 40 is over the amount that we have right now. So that ugly conversation about what to do with those handful of people that would be over is a non.
Exactly.
Okay.
There is a lot in this ordinance that does seem like it's about what to do if we get into that bind. So, but I guess we won't get into that bind, or we might because of the location of them, the 300-foot thing.
Location is the question, I think, is what we're all struggling with.
Did anybody look at a map to sort of look at, are we going to get into that? Or are there places?
So it depended on if we were going to keep it in residential only or not, which was just decided, yes, residential only was what we had decided upon. If it's in residential only, there might be one specific place, but if it's in all the other zones, there are more than one place. So, but the residential only, there might be one, possibly the most is what we're thinking.
How does that footage compare to other cities that use theirs?
It's similar.
It's pretty much like other cities.
Yeah.
Right, which obviously are bigger places, so is that one of the things that we can research a little more? Like, would 150 or 200 alleviate that and we still accomplish what we're trying to accomplish? You know what I mean? If there is that contention of, oh, well, on 250 feet or 300 feet, our neighborhoods and our streets are smaller than other cities. So I'm just asking.
A lot of cities do block based, just one per block.
Gotcha.
So, that can be greater than the 300. I mean, there's just different ways of looking at it, but we came across, in looking at this, the 300 was not uncommon.
300 is what Coos Bay just adopted last year.
That's, yeah, and I guess that's just, I'm having a hard time wrapping around my head. Just spatially, just the size of Port Orford compared to those other cities. But, okay, so, did you have another question?
Well, I have a few specific questions, but I'm wondering if we should, it sounds like the big outstanding question is this parking in the 10 MU and commercial that you guys want input from us. So I wonder if we should just deal with that first and then go to some of the
Yeah, because then we
nitty-gritty
gotta
stuff.
go to the changes too.
Yeah.
So my one question about the parking is that, was there any consideration on the parking restrictions, if there were, to be during the quiet hours? And not necessarily all day long, if you're doing a vacation rental, you have a chance to do an event. And I know 7 o'clock is kind of late, because it's, you want to be able to park in front of your house, and that's where the contention is, but could that be
Are you talking about residential or commercial?
residential?
No, there was no discussion about that.
Well, but there
we
is no
did
quiet
talk about
hours in
that
commercial.
We talked about events.
We talked about daytime versus night, overnight.
Yeah.
But when we start talking noise, we have to fall back on our noise ordinance, which is 10 o'clock.
Right.
But we're talking two different things, parking, creating noise, but our noise ordinance says 10 o'clock.
Right.
So the only problem I have with a commercial zone on parking is we don't have a parking ordinance in a commercial zone. I understand why we want to put one in the residential zone, because we don't want people parking in your driveway. Makes sense, right? But in a commercial zone, every business in town uses our right-of-ways for parking. Every single business in town, every restaurant, every hardware store, every business in town uses the right-of-way. And when we were going over the parking ordinance years and years ago, and I know planning was disappointed because you guys worked on it really, really hard, we decided at council level not to follow through with it. And the reason was a gentleman named Gary Wickham come up to the podium and he says, look, he says, we have 5,000 people in town for the 4th of July. And he says, nobody has a problem finding a place to park. That's why we kind of backed off on that. It made a lot of sense, actually. So I don't know, I can perceive problems for parking in the 10MU zone in a couple areas. But how do you apply it just to those businesses and not to the rest of the commercial businesses that already use that parking area?
What about not to exceed in a residential area? Like not rooms, not one per room, you got places with 6 rooms. What if it's not to exceed 3 parking spaces or 4, whatever the number is in the residential zone?
And one of the questions we had was, do we treat the 10MU separately because it is mixed use zone and there are residences in the 10MU? And, you know, it could be problematic for the residents. So not necessarily proposing to regulate in the commercial, but just in the 10MU.
That's a tough one.
Residential. Yeah, because I mean, 10MU was written with an intention behind it, so we should definitely try to maintain
I
it.
think there's no parking requirements though within the 10MU code. So if I right, yeah, I'm
For new
not sure.
construction.
No, it only has to be, I
No.
think on the 101, there, it is not for new construction solely. It
Yeah,
has
we
to
went
be-
into this in depth,
Yeah,
Jessica and I.
yeah,
Mhm.
so that's the catch, that's where the catch was with the 10MU zone.
Would have been a good idea. I like Tim, I see that there are some places where we're gonna hit problems in the future. We may not hit them if we do nothing right now to regulate parking in the commercial and 10MU related to this. And I think the problem is we're talking about like the vacation rentals where it's one house and they've got a driveway and it's no problem. But what we're getting increasingly in our commercial and 10MU are places that are literally more like boutique hotels. They're like multi-units without parking. And so that's, there's a certain neighborhood where there's a lot of those, and there could be more because there still are empty lots to develop. So we could get into trouble in the future there if we do nothing, but it's a pretty sticky widget because of the lack of space. I mean, there's space on the street. Eventually, it's going to be too full. So that's kind of what I was trying to wrap my head around. But I think there's only a few places where we have that problem.
But it's easier to regulate it now than to try to roll back when it becomes an issue in the future.
Yes.
My brain's kind of wrapping around it, like you have your different zones and 10MU is a mixed use zone. So when people buy property or they live there, they expect the mixed use. Whereas when you buy in a residential zone, you expect the residential environment. So it's way harder to try to get the 10MU and the other zones wrapped onto it, because then it starts seeming like a zoning issue more than a licensing issue. So regardless of how we want to skin that cat, we need to put it in the license language more. And it sounds like a zoning thing, like just as we're talking about right now.
Yeah, maybe Mr. Kern can weigh in.
Yeah.
Yes.
Commissioner Bird, I also think that we should be looking at this from the safety standpoint. Like, is there enough space for a fire truck or emergency vehicles to get in? Because that obviously should be top of mind.
In my experience, this is a problem only in residential neighborhoods where and it's just, people, a whole family will rent out a house for a weekend, they'll have a family reunion, and they'll have like 16 cars or some number of cars that far exceed what a single family dwelling would have, and it creates problems for the neighbors, and they plug the street and, emergency vehicles can't get by. So I've never really seen it in commercial or, maybe mixed use areas, but so I agree with your all the kind of the community sense there that fixed problems that exist or where you anticipate them to be, and parking is one of them. And keep in mind that this is a parking requirement that would apply to the license. So it's not like you're going to be ticketing cars or anything like that. If there is a short-term rental and they've got, 10 cars associated with it and they're parked all over the street and they're required to, by the ordinance, to park on site and have X number of parking spaces, it's a violation of their STR license. And so it'll come back to haunt the licensee of the STR.
So just to clarify, Commissioner Head, that then it's not a zoning issue. If we're,
It shouldn't be. And you could have this parking requirement only apply in residential zones, and I think that would be fine, and it wouldn't convert this into a development regulation. I think it just references like that are fine because that's where the problem exists in my experience in residential areas.
Commissioner Lovendall, have you had any experience of the residential sections of the 10MU? Because that's our concern. We have residential areas within the 10MU. It's a mixed use, but they're primarily residential.
It's easiest to define it by zone rather than something more amorphous like residential area.
We have that residential overlay zone. Tim and I both live in that zone, so we can speak to it. It's a pretty small area. My street is pretty big and there's plenty of parking. Your street is pretty small, but there's there's off-street parking, so.
but then in other areas, there's high density development happening in the 10MU.
Yes.
No
No parking, yeah.
Yeah,
That's, I think, the problem people are looking at. That's what we're looking at. But how do you just apply it to one specific area without getting in trouble?
Here,
So
like,
what's the happy medium? What do we apply across all zones? Because even if you're not infringing on a residential area, if you got 20 cars in there, you're gonna be infringing on another business or something. So is there a magic number?
like you
For the
said, Pat,
license, not
yeah,
the-
maximum number of vehicles.
Well, right now, in here, it says required for 1R and 2R. Can we change it and add the residential overlay zone of 10 MU?
Yes,
that only picks up some. It doesn't pick up all of those areas, but
But that would be the only other way to do that.
Yes.
Because then the other places who have that are not required technically by the 10 MU zone to have parking.
well, we
So-
could, like Mr. Kern said, Commissioner Head, we could add it to the business license because like Mayor Pat said, it's not just about affecting residences, it's about affecting nearby businesses as well. So if we make it part of the business license to have a cap on the total number of cars, we could do it that way.
So would that be the business license for an STR only, or would that apply to, say, I mean, there's several restaurants in the area we're talking about.
Just for short-term vacation rentals.
Okay, if we can get away with that, that'd be the way to do it, because if not, it's gonna affect, I mean, we've got restaurants down there that have 20 cars in the parking lot, which is the right of way all the time.
Well, that is the whole motivation from the get-go, is not having an inordinate amount of something that takes away from something else, so.
we're trying to plan ahead so that to foresee that this is a problem coming and try to be fair from the outset.
Ironically, it seems like the problem is lessening a little bit that we've been working
Well-
on. It's changing.
So I guess this is a question, I'm gonna throw a wrench in it. What if the STR person files for a right-of-way permit? Are we gonna say no, that they can't have right-of-way permits for that specific reason? I just need to know that for me personally. So
What
that's
do you
why-
what do you mean a right-of-way
Yeah.
permit?
File for a right-of-way permit to use your right-of-way for, to either plant something or do something. What if they wanted to use it for parking? 'Cause some people
Doesn't
do have to
Crazy
put-
Norwegians have a right-of-way permit for that? Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So what if someone wants to put gravel down as an extra parking spot and make it an extra parking spot?
Do they have, they don't have a right of way permit, do they?
I don't know.
I don't think, I'm not aware of any restaurant or any business in
I
town. that
thought
has a
they
right of way.
did.
It's like another right away, excuse us, we need to
Yeah.
dig our pipeline. here.
Yeah, I know.
And I'm sorry you made the nice rock and the planters there, but we're gonna have to remove them
Yeah.
to get risk of the right.
But if they file for that, then what do we do in our office? Do we say no because it's a short-term rental, or do we, I mean, that's the only question. That's me, it's just playing devil's advocate because I've gotten obviously.
It's a good point. It's something that we should think through.
I wonder, I mean, it sounds like we need to work on this ordinance and then maybe work on a parking ordinance, but I know how the parking ordinance went last time and
It's got to be associated with the business license, though.
But that right is just a right away. And every issue and instance is different. That's why you come and put an application in for a right of way.
And we
So-
can revoke it at any time.
Exactly. That's why I'm not saying it's a non-issue, but it's a non-issue. It can be becomes a problem, it's a problem, sorry, you don't have your right.
Well,
And I know that it applies, but I don't think it has to be written in
Well-
because it's totally controlled.
Getting back to this question of what to do in the commercial and 10MU zone, I mean, coming into this meeting, I thought, well, gosh, maybe we should, like what Tim is saying, keep moving forward on what we've got here, focus on the residential, deal with the other later. But from what I'm hearing, talking about business license and SPRs, I mean, it kind of makes sense. You guys have it tied to the parking, tied to the number of bedrooms. And so you're allowed that. And I'm just wondering.
Whether it's on street or not.
No, it's off, you folks
It's
have
on
it where it
street.
has to be on
It's off
site.
street. It's
On
off
site,
street.
yes.
Yeah,
So we got
commercial.
covered, basically.
We've got it covered in the residential, but we're not requiring it. So the commercial is the question. I was sort of thinking, could it be on site? But like you can't have 20 cars. If you've got 6 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, you have the maximum of 6 cars. You know, but I guess it's not on their land. It's on city streets. So I'm sorry, I got a little bit.
Well, are you suggesting that the city would limit the on-street parking in a commercial zone to the number of bedrooms?
Well, I guess I was, but I don't think that's right. Sorry. I was wondering if it could be tied to the business license, but it doesn't make sense. We have the open street right now, and we don't want, the problem is if we tried to limit that, then it would almost be like privatizing the streets for the people who have businesses, and we don't want to do that, right? It's got to be like a first come, first serve sort of deal.
That's the way it's always been, and it's always worked.
Yeah.
At least work with 1 car for 2 bedrooms too, in our situation. Off-street parking, you need to have 1 spot for every 2 bedrooms. And then you have those cars allotted, and yeah, you might get a little bit on the right of way, but it would alleviate most of the problem.
Well, that's what we have in residential, so I think right now.
But like I said, in 10MU zone, some of those places are not required to show.
This is a license, this is for, to run an STR.
But they
so
have a lot of STRs right down there, exactly what I'm thinking on Fifth Street,
Mm-hmm.
because you think about all those down Fifth Street, not all of those are required to have parking when we first created those houses, or first created, so what are they supposed to do, because there's no land left, or there's no way to get to their land that is left for parking.
Well, they should be fine unless they go 3 stories on top and add 6 more rooms.
Well, I don't know, but they're not required, they weren't even required to have 1 parking spot.
But that's
So,
like, we're not gonna get everything perfect. Like, we're gonna get this as good as we possibly can, and then we're gonna cycle through
Right.
this, and then in 5 or 10 years, we'll be, cool, we're gaining.
Right.
I don't think we're gonna get.
That's
Oh,
why
yeah.
we're in a good spot.
No, and that's kind of where we started with, was the residential zones, you know, and that's, because my question was always, how can you do a business in a residential zone? Mr. Kearns, in your experience, how can you have a commercial business in a residential zone?
It could be non-conforming, it could be pre-existing. Otherwise, it would be a home occupation. So it's generally not something that's allowed if it's a residential zone. But you know, when
Right?
one reason this sort of defies that normal kind of traditional view is that these are, you know, in theory, not going to function any differently than a residence. You know, the only business aspect is over the internet when money changes hands. So even your traditional home occupation, like a tax or accounting business, or a lawyer, or a nail stylist in a residential zone, you know, they've got to have a certain amount of parking. They can't have signs, and you know, they have customers come to the place. But you know, there's only one appellate case in Oregon appellate courts that address that question about is an STR more residential or is it more akin to commercial use? And just as a general proposition, the only case out there, the Court of Appeals said it's residential. And I think because it's people go there and they go to sleep and they treat it and use it as a residence. And that should be your objective here, to have these things function like residences. They don't look any different. They don't function any different. They don't have any, generate more traffic or noise or trash or anything. They should be indistinguishable, should be your kind of goal here.
Well, I think it sounds like our inclination, I don't know, Carrie, if you have a thought about this so far, is that to just kind of not deal with parking in the commercial, but if you offered, Greg, to maybe do some research, I think if there's some research to be had that would be shed light, maybe that could be helpful, but.
If you would like the planning commission to look at it, we could do that. We didn't because this was restricted to residential, so.
And are you saying commercial or both commercial and the 10 MU?
I guess I was just thinking the 10 MU.
Okay, just the 10 MU.
But we don't have to, if our goal is to work towards completion and people don't want to open that, it just seems like this is the moment. I don't understand what a good solution, I can't envision a good solution. So if there is one, that would be helpful to know, but otherwise I think, we're on the path of like what Tim is saying, leave this parking on the street and hope for the best. But I think we're gonna come to problems before too long, and we may have to revisit it for that neighborhood, the 10 MU in particular.
Yeah, we definitely will. So why don't we just deal with it now?
So here's the deal. We got an hour left. We need to hit the high notes. And those high notes will craft perhaps a motion at the regular meeting until that point. So unfortunately, we won't have the answers for you until next Thursday. We've established that parking, residential or commercial or both, is one of the hot topics for the council, or, to get. So next, I guess we can go to maybe the changes you made today, because that obviously apply.
I do. I have one question that just popped up to me. If our starting off on this train down the track has dropped 7 short-term rentals off the list, city councilors, would you like the cap to be changed? Would you like the cap to be 35 or 33? We chose 40 because it was a little under 43, and we thought, well, we're not going to maybe hurt too many people or whatever. But right now we have 33.
I like that idea, Greg, because we already have, I was worried, we already have 10% of our housing units. If you include the ones in the commercial, like if we have 700 housing units, we've got 10% is vacation rentals. So if you guys can just even get back.
Most cities are capping at 3%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I personally would like full council to be.
No, and that's what's gonna be that's another bullet point. We got parking, we have that we need to write down.
I don't think we should give direction at this moment, but
no, we're just gleaning information.
I think everybody was pretty accepting of 40. We have to really look at it hard, I think. I personally.
We're working with real numbers now, though, because recently we didn't have a solid number on things. And,
right.
And also, we have.
Yes, please. Shayla has a question. Go ahead, Shayla. Sorry.
No worries, but I had a question on a different topic. So if you guys aren't done with your conversation, I can wait.
No. We got no, we're okay. Go ahead.
So my question was to Mr. Kearns in regards to the section that says compensation for reasonable investment. And I was just wondering if you had ever seen that actually play out in a community. It seems to me that, these vacation rentals can make a substantial amount of money in a month. And when they become long-term rentals, they make considerably less. So I could see that the appraisals would be greatly affected by that. And I was just wondering if you had ever seen that section actually play out in a community.
No, and it's designed to not really be something that people can use, because what it's getting at is what investment have people made in the properties that's uniquely tailored and can only be used for short-term rental as opposed to long-term rental. And that's how the takings case law works, is that basically they're entitled to compensation if you deny them all economically viable use of the property. So that's never going to happen with this kind of regulation. because it can always be long-term rented. And I'm hard pressed to think of any investment someone makes in a property that can't be used for long-term rental. There is another takings test that considers a bunch of factors, and one of them is reasonable investment back expectations. But again, these properties can always be used for long-term rental. And, they may be income properties and you can maybe make a lot more as short-term rental, but the local government is not legally obligated to help you maximize your rental income. It's reasonable use. Economically viable use is what it is. So the reason this kind of provision is in there is if anyone is kind of stuck with the cap and can't be renewed, then they're going to, I've heard this over and over again, well, you've taken my property, I can't use it. Well, you can use it. Well, no, I've got a lot invested in it. Well, then prove it and prove that it can't be used for anything else. And before anyone can actually sue the local government for a takings, they have to pursue this process. And so that's why I put it in these ordinances, because you can't, the doors of the court are closed if you haven't exhausted all your local remedies. This is a local remedy for potential compensation. You've got to bring it to the local government's attention, say, hey, this is not compensating me enough. And it forces people to go through the process before the city can be sued. And if they don't go through the process, they can't sue the city. So none of my clients have been sued.
Okay. That answers my question. Thank you.
Yep.
I have a few specifics. Can I just mention my specifics? I wanted to suggest you ask Greg just about input. I'd like to see in the purpose a little bit more about protecting our city's needed housing supply. We don't have that. I think that is really one of the real reasons we started this whole thing was, when we were hearing Jessica was getting calls from out of town people saying, oh, I hear you have lax STR regulation. We don't have any. I want to buy up a bunch of properties. I think that intent needs to be better in there. I also wanted to ask, there is this section on page 5 about administrative rules. And it's basically, it's kind of weird because it just gives Jessica or our city administrator the ability to kind of write up a bunch of stuff. And I don't really understand why we want to have that in there. I looked at a bunch of other ordinances and I didn't see anything like that. And I worry we'd be getting into like interpretation where citizens would say, well, Jessica's interpreting it this way and not that way. And it just seems like other ordinances just have everything spelled out. There's no question about how is it going to be interpreted. So can you explain that to me?
Administrative rules are more so like, this is when we get the licensing, it's going to be filed and be done on this day. So it's more of a time frame and it's more office procedure than anything. And that's so that we can make sure that everything is followed as it goes through the process. That's really what it is. So if someone needs to be put on the wait list, there's going to be the process to do that. That's what those administrative things are.
Okay. Thank you for helping me understand that.
The substantive.
Consistent with the provisions language.
Yeah.
Exactly. All the substantive provisions that matter should be in this code adopted by council. So the administrator can, adopt their particular forms, and this wait list thing is going to be sort of tricky in how it actually is administered. I'm not really sure. But those sorts of things don't necessarily need to be spelled out in this ordinance. And if you see differently, then you could tell Jessica to, let's not, we don't want you to adopt that through some administrative process. We want to take that up as council and amend the ordinance.
And the other thing that's outstanding in here is the thing about hosted homestays. Did you guys discuss that? Is that part of what you're going to tell us about?
Yes. So we like hosted homestays. We like the fact that it doesn't take a house out of circulation for long-term habitation. And we also felt that that a homestay should fall under the short-term rental rules, but not be subject to the cap. So a person can live full-time in the house, but but still rent out a room or part of it.
I would agree with that. And I'll tell you why. I think the state of Oregon is looking at giving homeowners incentives for renting a room out via tax breaks currently right now. So that would, override anything we would write anyway. So I'm with you on that. Let's protect those folks that want to share their home.
It's a great mom and pop thing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of single folks that could use it, the company.
The other related the other related question that you need to consider is accessory dwelling units, ADUs. Do you want them to be eligible for short-term rental?
We have discussed that in our, we have been discussing ADUs and we do not want them to be short-term rentals.
But they are also not in our code currently, so when they are in the code, that'll be something that we can discuss and put back in there.
And they're not permitted.
That's correct.
Right. I think
Taxing
state
entries.
law now requires you to allow them.
Yeah.
We're under the 2,500 population, so that
Okay.
is actually the reason why.
It's not this conversation, but it seems silly to be looking for housing options and not really to have that as a conversation.
Yeah.
with other individuals.
Well, that's why we gotta get this one done so we can get to the next thing.
I have a housekeeping question. The meeting, it says, was from 4:30 to 5:30. Is that not true?
It's automatically says that in go-to meeting when I make the meeting. It gives you an hour and then we can extend it as we just stay on and don't turn it off. So
I
this
see.
is an automatic thing that.
I had plans to be somewhere at 6 o'clock. so
Well,
that's-
we can wrap this up. We can wrap it.
Okay, there were a couple
There were
items that you want to
changes,
hear,
yeah.
we did talk about.
Yeah, because then really if we can focus on anything new that you came up with that we can.
So the hosted homestays was one. Oh, yes, and this was brought up by a citizen also. In 13.05030, or is it, I guess it's 05, 030, definitions calls for bedrooms to have a built-in closet. And this is a new addition from our last draft. And I looked it up. It's not in the Oregon code. It's not in the International Building Code. So I think it should be removed. Are we-
Absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
I think that's more for real estate and selling.
And you, the planning commission feels like homestay is a part of this, not
Yes.
something else.
Definitely, because they should still have a legal egress window. So if there's a fire,
Right,
we want,
right.
health and safety is a big issue.
And I think it would be hard to sort them out, like if they're going on the Airbnb website and it's like a homestay versus a vacation rental, right? Like that might be confusing. So if they're in the same ordinance, it's kind of all like, oh, this is the homestay category, so that's
Yeah,
not a
so
cap.
it's rental.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Then the other one was, this was just a question that we didn't get to, was should we adopt an amortization period to allow owners to comply with off-street parking? So if in the residential zone, if they don't have adequate parking for the number of bedrooms they have, should there be an extension in the time for them to get that, which is what that amortization is? And that question is for Mr. Kearns.
In Hood River, we gave them 5 years to come into compliance with parking requirements.
Okay.
Because
That seems like a good idea
it
to
shouldn't
me.
be it shouldn't be a deal killer unless you've got houses that are short-term rented in the city that have no parking. It really is just it reduces how many people can be there. So it's not a black and white thing. It just reduces the intensity of the use. So it could go either way. But we gave them 5 years in Hood River.
Thank you. One other one was, and I had a question about the amortization period for pre-existing legal short-term rentals over the cap of 40, and also that is applied to the short-term rentals that might be within 300 feet of each other. And we had, in our discussions in the Planning Commission, we had talked about just grandfathering those in because we have a non-transferable business license, they would just phase out over a period of time. Is the amortization, is that really the best way to go? It seems complicated in that case, in the short term, in the 300-foot distance requirement. It seems complicated because if there are two within 300 feet and neither one of them want to give up their spot, in 5 years, they're still looking at the same issue.
Right.
Whereas
The
there are
the amortization period is really only applicable to the regulations that would be deal killers for existing STRs. So the density, 300-foot density is one such, because if you've got two within, here's the real dilemma with the density is if you've got 2 or 3 STRs currently that are all within 300 feet, who do you throw out of the pool? So it poses a real administrative headache. And so that's why, if it's a deal killer, you put it into this amortization so they don't have to comply immediately. But the density one, for sure, that's going to be a problem down the road. You might consider, allowing any currently existing STRs that are within 300 feet of another just to persist like that forever. And to save Jessica the risk of being punched at the counter by someone who gets thrown out of the pool.
Or until the house is sold.
I like that.
Until the house is sold.
Yeah. But for the cap thing, that's another potential deal killer. But if you don't have a cap that is below the pool size, then it's not an issue. Parking would go in this, and this would be the deferred compliance thing for existing licensees on their renewal date. It would apply, all these would apply to new license applications. So all new licensees would have to comply with everything.
So really, we could grandfather in if there were any short-term rentals over the cap in the initial period. We could grandfather those in, and we could grandfather in the 300, anyone within 300 feet of each other. That would be another way to approach it.
And so, for example, the city of Bend, they just have a density requirement, 250 feet. And here's the thing, most jurisdictions take a long time to come up with these regulations. 2 years is kind of typical. Bend did it that way. They had a public vetting process and a committee and all that. So after 2 years, they didn't have a moratorium on new licensees. So after 2 years, anybody who ever thought they might maybe sort of kind of possibly want to rent their property, they got a license. So by the time they adopted the regulations, they had a lot of licenses that were just kind of, placeholders. And so the city attorney said she just did not want to deal with any takings challenges by throwing out any of these licenses to bring them into to force the density requirement. Plus there's that dilemma of, if you've got 2 or 3 or whatever within 250 feet, who wins, who loses? Yeah. So they said everybody is grandfathered forever. And so there are a lot of permits in that category in Bend, and it has sort of warped the real estate market there. When next time you go to Bend, take a look at the street signs for sale signs in front of houses, and they will always say on there whether they've got the certificate or not, whether they've got the license or not.
Yeah.
And it will be a $50,000 bump to the purchase price of the house, at least.
I think it sounds like that might be a good idea to go with the grandfathering. If we figure out how many we have, my guess is it's going to be a handful of places, like maybe 1 or 2 where there's 2 that are close together. And I think that's worth just dealing with in our community.
And then the license isn't transferable in the residential.
Yeah.
We don't want Jessica to get punched out either.
No.
That would be
So I certainly wouldn't recommend you adopt that unless you knew exactly how many don't currently comply.
I can find that out for sure.
Yeah, we should understand that. That's a very good point.
Yeah, because I'd be serious.
Yeah, I think it is only 1 or 2 possibly.
Best to know what we're doing.
Well, I mean, our houses are a little.
Yeah.
I had one other that I was wanted to bring up at the meeting today, and I didn't get a chance to, was inspections were in the draft that we looked at in December, but it's not in this draft. And we also actually requested something to the effect of that the city manager or their agent could conduct a site visit. And as I understand it, it doesn't mean that they have to, but it allows for us to do that if we decide that's what we want to do.
Commissioner Head, we're going to be generating more revenue with the increased fee structure. Maybe we could pay licensed inspectors if on a need, as needed basis. Like I want to.
The biggest thing, and I don't know, Pat, if you guys want to try, that opens me and the city up for liability if I do those type of things.
No, I'm talking about a licensed inspector like Jeff McDaniel.
Yeah, that's
or,
what I'm saying. Like that's if that's in the code for me to do, that just opens up a whole can of worms. And so I would prefer me or my staff don't.
Right. No. The problem I see with that is we don't currently require that of restaurants or any other business or any other residents in town.
We do for homes in order to to have a occupancy permit. They have to be inspected for those things.
Is that in the current county code, the new code?
It's in the Universal Building Code. Okay. Yeah. So the fact this is a residence.
But it doesn't require, but the occupancy does not require like to make sure there's a fire extinguisher or those type of things.
What do they inspect?
The structure, physical structure of the building, if I remember correctly.
They inspect to see that each bedroom has a window that has a certain dimensions that people can climb out of in case of a fire, a smoke detector, and a carbon monoxide detector, handrails, rails on decks, things like that.
Fire extinguishers.
Industries have it lined out to where you get inspected and everything's safe, and now it's
Not really.
Well, they have to.
Well, this is new. I mean, we've talked about like hotels. If you're a motel or hotel, you have fire requirements, you've got sprinklers, you've got, there's all sorts of regulations for a motel. And so this business is a new kind of business. I mean, restaurants have different kinds of regulations. This one is sort of a new one. And so that's what we're.
And periodic inspections.
So you think that's important to have periodic inspections?
I think you should require a building inspection and a emergency life safety inspection at the intake or at the first renewal after adoption of this, just to make sure that, right, as written, it's kind of incumbent upon the owner to kind of like know what the regulations are and kind of comply with it, but there's no inspection. And maybe it's more of a county problem, but it's what I've heard is that a lot of short-term rental owners are kind of DIY people who will do their own fix it up improvements to the house, and they introduce a whole lot of kind of building code violations that way, and sometimes life safety problems. The egress window is a big one because I would bet that most of your STRs are not compliant with that. So you need some way of kind of verifying. Some jurisdictions have every 2 or 3 years, they've got to re-inspect and get re-verified. So you should think about how you want that dealt with. Just to, I don't know that the DIY project owner is a problem in Port Orford. It's an issue in some places. So if deal with the problems that you know.
The reason I have a problem with it, I just had a loss prevention inspection at my establishment. And any one of you folks could have done a better job, honestly. And that's my whole complaint about that all along, is who is qualified to do it.
Who did your inspections?
Was out of the valley, and I mean, it was ridiculous. It was a huge waste of money on my insurance company's part.
Who did the inspections?
A company in the Central Valley.
Okay, if you're going to do it, I have the requirement. I'd say the local fire chief. Fire departments have someone on staff who are authorized to do these inspections. And for the building code, if you want to do it, have the local building official do it. And it could be the county building official.
our fire department is a volunteer fire department, first of all, and the building official inspector is located out of the county. And the code enforcer also, and I think it was what, 250 an hour was.
That's why I suggested a licensed, like a contractor, and on a hire as needed basis, a licensed inspector, somebody that does inspections locally for homes.
I wonder if it could be like, when you buy a house, you hire a home inspector and then he writes up, usually it's a he writes up a report. Could somebody get that report and bring it, or would that be a loophole? It needs to be us instead of.
It's better than nothing.
Well, I would just like to see the language in here, so when we decide if and how we're going to do it, we're covered.
So you're saying put in language that says we may
The
do
word
it.
says, the
or we
language we
should.
saw before says may.
Yeah.
So, and I,
We build it into our fee structure.
Yeah, which entails finding out who can do it and.
There are local, licensed inspectors that do this regularly. So,
I like the idea of the may, because then that way we're going to have to evolve with this. I mean, we're going to have to get it as good as we can right from the outset. And you guys have been all doing really great work to get it to that place. But then we're going to have to make adjustments. So if we have that and anticipate it, we can figure it out later.
right, we're going to come up with something and you guys are going to, you might pick it apart, but hopefully not.
Home inspector, like a pre-sale home inspector seems like a good applicant, because they're like, call me up and hire me, it's not. an
Exactly.
agency other than-
yeah,
and they're all about
they're
that.
independent contractors. Yeah, they're
Well,
licensed.
doesn't it depend on what you want them to inspect as to what kind of an inspector you have?
Yes.
I think that's the first step, is to figure out what they're going to inspect.
Right.
Well, I just had my home inspected from the building inspector, and he said that he would come up from Gold Beach and do it for the city. Now, I don't know how that's going to work.
Yeah. Under the code enforcement thing, because that's like the negotiations with the code enforcement, with him and the code enforcement. So it's under that $250 an hour. That we.
Well, I would think of doing an inspection on a house in an hour. I mean, we're not gonna have them tear the house apart. We want the resident to be safe. That's it, period.
They might be able to do 2 or 3 in an hour.
Probably.
Well, we get so bogged down by numbers, and it's like, even if all 40 needed it inspected, we had to put the money up, it can be done in a week, or yes, it's cumbersome, but it seems like it's one of those things that we need to research a little bit more.
And we put it into our fee structure and then we get it done.
So it looks like we have about 5 minutes left. Is there anything, well, the council will be talking about at least the 3 points we touched on, and maybe a little clearer direction on the inspection.
I've got a
Is there
question.
anything Mr. Kearns, go ahead.
No, this is Gary.
Oh, sorry, Gary. Go ahead.
If an STR violates its license and has a license revoked, do we need to discuss our methods of enforcement? How do we keep them from just continue to renting the place?
So in here, once it's revoked, they can't reapply for a period of 2 years is what it says. But then it also, it's the violations of actually operating one and not obtaining these things, if I remember correctly, is $500. And with that $500 in our physical code that's been out there for a long time, I don't remember the exact line, but it says that each day is considered a new occurrence. So if you take that $500 and you find them, they've been sitting there for 30 days, there you go. You can keep going and you can lien the property. There's that. I don't like that, but I'm just saying that's what's written in the code I found out today.
How did that work out with our last lighting ordinance problem?
That's what I was thinking.
It did.
Once again, that's the appeal of it being a license thing, because it's like preemptive rather than passive.
Well, we have been reluctant to lien somebody's business because of them not having the right lighting, some of us more than others. But this is a bigger deal. I mean, we're
Health and safety.
and we're,
More teeth.
There's gonna be black market housing, no matter what we do. So just be aware of that. There's going to be somebody that figures a way to advertise their house and rent it, and they're gonna get by. It's gonna happen. We're just trying to, we're gonna make the honest people be honest.
Is there anything that you specifically need some, I don't want to say guidance on, or anything that you know that is going to be contentious for us, or that will need clarification other than the parking? What did we come up with?
Parking cap and the caps, and then I'm gonna find out how many feet are within the 300 feet, and then I just had highlighted.
That was the other one, but maybe the 300 feet.
Yeah, yeah, and then also the one that I thought about how we're gonna handle complaints, but I think the council and I need to talk about that more than anything too.
Like the cap.
Complaints, you have number 2, you might want to look at that. The city of 3 or more unresolved complaints. What constitutes an unresolved complaint? So if you have a dog that you have 3 parties, but they, you know, you have a noise complaint, they cut it off, is that resolved? And they do that 3 times?
It's, yeah, basically, if I remember correctly.
That seems a little nebulous.
No, that's, I think if I remember correctly, unresolved was the person not responding, meaning the agent not responding, or the person who was responsible, you know, their contact party, but I would have to double check and go through it.
Wasn't there a time frame?
Yeah, there was, I'm trying to remember,
24
hours, yeah, I have to think again, whatever.
Was it in the nuisance ordinance?
It's in this portion of the code too, it also, if I remember correctly.
Also, did we mention that we struck out the 05.05.070D?
Yeah, I was gonna give her the notes. I was gonna give her the notes.
Yeah, never mind. Jessica was
I was
temporarily.
gonna give you the notes, Jessica.
But it just also for the council to know that it was redundant with other parking language, and so we decided to take that out.
So there will be other things we need to tweak, but I think we have what we need from you to move forward. And it's been really great to meet with you guys.
And you'll know a lot more next week as far as what the whole will of the council feels.
I have just one more little tiny comment. Sorry, Pat, I know you're ready. to go.
No, you got it.
Which is just that concept of redundancy. There's a couple places in here where it's a little bit redundant, like I think with nighttime, daytime, or you just might read through it once with an eye to that, because it will be easier for people to follow the ordinance if it's succinct. And I was just noticing it, there's some places where it's redundant, because then that way people will feel like when they read one section, you know, so anyway.
I would like to thank Glenn. This is a really good document. I was really pleased with what I read. So we'll tweak the last little bits of it, and I think we'll get somewhere, and it'll be good for everybody.
Absolutely.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then in the future, when we have big ticket items, we will try to workshop it a little bit more. All right, thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. I may have a few additional comments. I'll send them by email to Jessica though, okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you very, very much for attending, Mr. Kearns. I should have said that before I closed the meeting. We very much appreciate your guidance. It's priceless.
My pleasure. Thank you.